Hello everyone, and I'm here to guide you into a peaceful slumber. If you find this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to know where you're from and what time it is as you unwind. So, settle in, get cozy, and let the relaxation begin. The first time I heard the sound, I was setting up camp in a remote section of Yellowstone National Park. A whisper that didn't belong among the natural forest sounds, something between a human voice and the wind through hollow bones. I dismissed it as exhaustion from the long hike. 3 days into a 2-week solo photography expedition documenting wildlife in the park's northern range, I hadn't expected company. My name is Michael Thompson. I've been a park ranger at Yellowstone for 15 years, though this trip was purely personal. After a decade and a half of watching tourists marvel at Old Faithful and warning them not to feed the bears, I thought I knew every inch of this wilderness. I was wrong. That night I awoke to frost on the inside of my tent. Strange, given it was mid-June. The temperature gauge on my watch read 28 degrees, a sudden, inexplicable drop. Outside, the moonlight cast long shadows across the clearing where I'd made camp. The trees seemed to bend inward, their silhouettes forming a circle around my small sanctuary of nylon and aluminum. I checked my phone out of habit. No signal, of course. That's when I noticed the footprints in the thin layer of frost outside my tent, human-sized but elongated, with strange indentations where toes should be. They circled my tent completely, then vanished into the tree line. Something rustled in the underbrush. I grabbed my flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness to reveal nothing, just swaying branches and dancing shadows. But the unshakable feeling of being watched persisted. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast wilderness. "Anyone there?" Only silence answered. Then, faintly, what sounded like my own voice echoed back. "Anyone there?" Sleep didn't come easily after that. I told myself it was just an animal. Maybe a coyote or a confused elk. Wildlife behaves strangely sometimes, especially around human encampments. But 15 years of ranger experience told me this was different. The next morning, the frost was gone. The temperature back to a reasonable 65 degrees. In the light of day, the footprints had vanished without a trace, making me question if I'd imagined the whole thing. I packed my gear and continued my planned route, pushing the experience to the back of my mind. Around midday, I stopped at a small stream to refill my water bottles. That's when I noticed the strange markings on a nearby tree. 3 deep gouges running vertically up the trunk, too high and too precise to be from a bear. They looked fresh, the inner wood still light-colored and oozing sap. As I approached the tree, a putrid smell hit me, like rotting meat mixed with wet soil. I'd smelled death before in the park, usually elk or deer taken down by wolves. This was similar, but wrong somehow. Unnatural. I took photographs of the markings, then continued hiking, but found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. The forest had gone quiet. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. In my years as a ranger, I'd learned to read the wilderness. When it falls silent, something is very wrong. By late afternoon, I reached my destination, a small valley known for its elk herds and occasional wolf sightings. But the valley was empty, no wildlife, not even insects. I set up camp on a ridge overlooking the area, hoping the elevated position would give me some security. As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds, I tried to convince myself that everything was normal. Wildlife patterns change. Animals migrate. Nothing to worry about. Until I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the tree line below. Too tall and thin to be human, yet standing on 2 legs. It remained motionless, staring up at my camp. Even from this distance, I could feel its gaze boring into me. I fumbled for my camera with its telephoto lens, but by the time I focused, the figure was gone. The photograph showed only empty space where I was certain something had stood. That night, the temperature dropped again. Ice crystals formed on my tent fly as the thermometer plunged below freezing. And somewhere in the darkness I heard it again, my own voice calling my name. Michael Thompson. No one else on this trip knew my full name. Sleep was impossible now. I sat awake, knife in one hand, bear spray in the other, waiting for dawn. And as the first light broke over the eastern ridge, I made a decision. I needed to find out what was happening. Little did I know that my curiosity would lead me into the darkest legend of Yellowstone, a nightmare the native tribes had whispered about for centuries, a hunger that never dies, a horror known as the Wendigo. The fourth day dawned with an unexpected radio call. My satellite phone, which I had brought for emergencies, buzzed with static before a familiar voice broke through. "Thompson, you there? It's Sarah Johnson." Sarah was one of the newer rangers, a brilliant ecologist with a passion for wildlife conservation. I'd trained her myself when she arrived last year. "I'm here," I replied, surprised. "What's going on?" "We've got a situation. Family of 4, the Martins, missed their check-in yesterday. Last seen heading into your area 3 days ago. Search parties being organized, but you're closest." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Send me their last known coordinates." As the details came through, I realized the Martins' planned route would have taken them directly through the valley I was overlooking, the same one that had been unnaturally empty of wildlife. "I'll start looking," I told Sarah. "Keep me posted on the search team's ETA." "Will do. And Mike?" Jack Whitecloud insisted on joining the search. "Says there's something important you should know." Jack was an elder from one of the local tribes who occasionally worked as a guide for the park. If he was concerned enough to join a search party, something serious was happening. "Tell him I'll meet them at Junction Creek by sundown." After gathering my gear, I descended into the valley following what should have been the Martins' trail. The silence was even more oppressive now. No wind, no birdsong, not even the buzz of insects. Just my footsteps and breathing, both of which seemed too loud in the stillness. About 2 miles in, I found their campsite, or what remained of it. The tent was still standing, but had been torn open from the inside. Sleeping bags lay scattered, one still containing a child's stuffed animal. A family-sized backpack leaned against a tree, containing water bottles, energy bars, a first aid kit, all the essentials no one would willingly leave behind. But it was the ground that told the most disturbing story. Deep furrows ran through the campsite as if someone, or something, had been dragged away. Multiple sets of footprints overlapped in chaotic patterns, small ones belonging to children running, adult-sized ones in pursuit, and among them, those same elongated prints I'd seen around my own tent. The temperature around the campsite was noticeably colder than the surrounding forest. My breath fogged in the air as I examined a strange substance on the tree trunks, a black, viscous residue that smelled of rot and something else. Something chemical and wrong. I documented everything, taking photographs and GPS coordinates. As I worked, the feeling of being watched intensified. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I found myself constantly turning, expecting to see someone or something behind me. That's when I heard it. A child's voice, faint but clear. "Mommy, where are you?" It came from deeper in the forest, away from the trail. Everything in my training told me to wait for backup, but if one of the Martin children was still alive out there... "Hello?" I called out. "National Park Service. Is someone there?" Silence then. "Help me, please. I'm scared." The voice seemed to shift location, now coming from my left. I turned toward it, stepping carefully through the underbrush. "Keep talking. I'll find you. This way. Please hurry." The voice led me deeper into the forest, away from the trail and campsite. Something felt wrong. The voice remained the same distance away no matter how quickly I moved. Still, I pushed forward, hoping to find a lost, frightened child. After 10 minutes of following the voice, I realized I'd been led in a complete circle, ending up back at the destroyed campsite. But now something was different. My backpack, which I'd left propped against a tree, was gone. A cold realization washed over me. I was being hunted. I drew my knife and bear spray, backing slowly toward the trail. The forest seemed to close in around me, branches reaching like gnarled fingers. From every direction I began to hear whispers, fragments of voices, some sounding like the Martin family, others like my fellow rangers, all calling for help. Breaking into a run, I sprinted back toward the main trail, no longer caring about tracking or evidence. Behind me, something crashed through the underbrush, something fast and large that moved with unnatural speed. I reached Junction Creek just as the sun began to set, finding Sarah Johnson and a small search party setting up a base camp. Jack Whitecloud stood apart from the others, his weathered face grave as he watched me emerge from the tree line. "You've seen it, haven't you?" he asked quietly as I approached, gasping for breath. "Seen what?" I managed between gulps of air. "The hunger that walks, the Wendigo." His eyes, dark and knowing, held mine. "It's woken again." The search party gathered around the campfire that night, flames casting long shadows across concerned faces. Besides Sarah and Jack, there were two other rangers I knew well, Rodriguez and Chen, plus a local search and rescue volunteer named Mackenzie. Everyone listened intently as I described what I'd found at the Martins' campsite. "We should call in more resources," Sarah suggested. "Maybe the FBI?" "No," Jack interrupted, his voice carrying a quiet authority that silenced everyone. "More people will only mean more victims." I'd known Jack Whitecloud for nearly a decade. He rarely spoke so definitively, especially when it came to park operations. The others turned to him with varying expressions of skepticism and curiosity. "You mentioned a Wendigo," I prompted. Jack nodded slowly, the firelight deepening the lines in his face. "My people have known about this creature for centuries. It was once human but transformed by the ultimate taboo, consuming human flesh. Now it hungers eternally, growing stronger with each victim but never satisfied." Rodriguez rolled his eyes slightly. "With all respect, Jack, we need to focus on finding this family, not on folklore." "It's not just folklore," I said, surprising myself. "Something's out there. Something that can imitate voices, create unnatural cold, something predatory and intelligent." Jack reached into his pack and pulled out a worn leather journal. "My grandfather was a guide in these mountains. He recorded his encounters and the stories passed down through generations." He opened the journal to reveal intricate drawings, a gaunt, skeletal figure with a deer's skull for a head, unnaturally long limbs and clawed hands. The details matched what I'd glimpsed at the edge of the valley. "The Wendigo grows stronger in winter, but can manifest anytime hunger and desperation take hold," Jack explained. "It corrupts the land around it. Animals flee, plants wither. It leaves a trail of cold and silence." Sarah leaned forward. And I'm not saying I believe this, but if this thing exists, how do we fight it?" "You don't," Jack said grimly. "You survive it. The Wendigo cannot be killed by conventional means. It can be wounded, temporarily driven away, but ultimately, it must be trapped." He turned pages in the journal, showing ancient symbols and what appeared to be ritual instructions. "There's a cave system about 5 miles north of here. According to my grandfather, it was used centuries ago to trap a Wendigo during a particularly harsh winter. The cave walls are marked with protective symbols." Chen, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke up. "So what's the plan? We just lure this thing into a cave and hope some old drawings keep it there?" Jack fixed him with a steady gaze. "Do you have a better suggestion?" "Yeah, find the family and get everyone the hell out of these woods." "And if they're already dead?" I asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. "Then we find whatever killed them," Rodriguez said firmly. "And if they're not dead?" Sarah added. "If they're out there somewhere, injured or lost." Jack closed his journal. "The Wendigo often keeps victims alive, especially in warmer months when its powers are weaker. It feeds on fear as much as flesh." A chill ran through the group. The implications were clear. The Martin family might still be alive, but in a situation too horrific to contemplate. We need to split up, I decided. Sarah and I will investigate the cave system Jack mentioned. If there's any truth to this, we need to know our options. Rodriguez, Chen, and Mackenzie continue searching for the Martins along their planned route. Splitting up is exactly what it wants, Jack warned. We don't have a choice, I countered. Every hour decreases the chances of finding survivors. As we set watch rotations for the night, Jack pulled me aside. There's something else you should know, he said quietly. The Wendigo doesn't just hunt randomly. It's drawn to certain people, those with darkness in their past or secrets in their hearts. What are you saying? I'm saying be careful what you think about out there. The Wendigo can sense guilt, regret, desire. It will use it against you. I wanted to dismiss his warning, but the memory of hearing my own name called in the darkness made me hesitate. I'll keep that in mind, I promised. That night, the temperature dropped again, frost forming on our tents despite the summer season. I took the first watch, staring into the darkness beyond our camp. Twice I thought I saw movement among the trees, a tall, thin silhouette watching our camp. But when I shined my flashlight, nothing was there. Around 2 a.m., Sarah woke for her shift. As I was about to enter my tent, she grabbed my arm. Mike, look. She pointed to the ground around our camp. In the dirt, barely visible in the firelight, was a circle of those same elongated footprints surrounding our entire campsite. They hadn't been there an hour ago. It's watching us, Sarah whispered. Let it watch, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Tomorrow we start hunting it. But as I zipped myself into my sleeping bag, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't the hunters in this scenario. We were the prey, and somewhere in the vast darkness of Yellowstone, the Martin family was experiencing horrors beyond imagination. Dawn arrived with a heavy mist clinging to the trees. After a tense breakfast, our group separated as planned. Rodriguez, Chen, and Mackenzie headed southeast to continue searching along the Martins' original route, while Sarah, Jack, and I prepared to locate the cave system. 5 miles north, you said? I confirmed with Jack as we shouldered our packs. He nodded, but his expression was troubled. The journey will be more difficult than the distance suggests. The Wendigo knows what we're planning. It will try to confuse us, separate us. Stay close, establish frequent comm checks, I instructed, checking my satellite phone's battery. If anyone sees or hears anything unusual, speak up immediately. Sarah adjusted her pack. What about the cold spots? Should we be tracking temperature changes? Good idea, I agreed, distributing digital thermometers from my kit. Significant drops could indicate its presence. As we moved deeper into the forest, the mist thickened until visibility dropped to mere yards. Trees loomed like spectral sentinels, their shapes distorted in the fog. Our footsteps seemed muffled, as if the forest itself was absorbing all sound. Jack led the way, occasionally consulting his grandfather's journal and marking trees with orange surveyor's tape to ensure we could find our way back. After about an hour, he stopped abruptly, raising his hand for silence. Listen, he whispered. At first, I heard nothing. Then faintly, voices, multiple conversations overlapping as if we were approaching a crowded ranger station or visitor center, but we were miles from any official park facility. It's trying to lure us off course, Jack warned. The voices aren't real. Sarah's face had gone pale. That's my mother's voice. She's been dead for 5 years. I could hear it too, voices from my past. My father calling my name. An ex-girlfriend laughing. A fellow ranger who died in a rockslide years ago asking for help. Ignore them, Jack insisted. Focus on me, on each other. That's real. We pressed forward, but the voices grew louder, more insistent. The mist swirled around us, creating phantasmal shapes that dissolved when directly observed. The temperature began to drop noticeably. our breath forming clouds in the increasingly frigid air. After another half-mile, we discovered the first sign that we weren't just chasing legends. A massive tree had been marked with symbols similar to those in Jack's journal. Concentric circles with lines radiating outward, carved deep into the bark and filled with some dark substance. My grandfather's generation renewed these markers, Jack explained, running his fingers over the symbols. They form a boundary line. Beyond this point, the Wendigo's influence grows stronger. So we're on the right track, I said, feeling a mix of validation and dread. Sarah had been documenting everything with her camera, but suddenly lowered it, frowning. These readings don't make sense. It's 20 degrees colder here than it was 50 yards back. A branch snapped loudly somewhere behind us. We spun around, but the mist made it impossible to see more than a few yards. We should keep moving, Jack urged. As we continued, the forest changed subtly. The trees grew more twisted, their bark blackened in patches. Fungi that shouldn't thrive in this ecosystem covered fallen logs. The ground became spongy underfoot, releasing a fetid odor with each step. The land is corrupted, Jack murmured. The Wendigo's presence poisons everything around it. 2 hours into our hike, we reached a small clearing where the mist thinned slightly. In the center stood a crude structure, branches and saplings bent into a dome-like shape covered with... "Oh God," Sarah gasped. Clothing. The dome was partially covered with torn clothing, adult and children's sizes. I recognized a red jacket from the description of what Mrs. Martin had been wearing. Inside the structure, we found evidence of the family: a child's shoe, a man's wallet containing David Martin's driver's license, a woman's hair clip, but no blood, no bodies. "They were kept here," Jack said, examining the disturbed ground. "Recently. Then they've been moved," I concluded, fighting rising panic. "Why would it move them?" Jack's expression darkened. "Because it knows we're coming." A child's scream shattered the silence, coming from somewhere ahead of us. It was so sudden, so real, that we all instinctively moved toward it before Jack grabbed our arms. "Wait! Remember what I told you, it imitates voices." "What if it's not an imitation?" Sarah challenged. "We can't just ignore it." "We proceed carefully," I decided. Together. The cave entrance appeared suddenly through the mist, a dark gash in a rocky hillside, partially obscured by gnarled trees. Ancient symbols had been carved around the opening, similar to those we'd seen on the boundary tree, but more elaborate, more numerous. "This is it," Jack confirmed, his voice hushed with reverence and fear. As we approached the entrance, the temperature plummeted further. Ice crystals formed on our eyelashes and in our hair. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of wind. Sarah's thermometer beeped. 17 degrees Fahrenheit, she reported incredulously. In June. From deep within the cave came another sound, a child sobbing, followed by a woman's voice. "Please, someone help us." Sarah looked at me, her professional resolve cracking. "Mike, that sounds real." "Stay together," I repeated, but my own determination was wavering. The voices sounded so genuine, so desperate. We activated our headlamps and prepared to enter the cave. Jack stopped at the entrance, removing tobacco from a pouch at his belt and sprinkling it on the ground while murmuring words in his native language. "A offering of respect and a prayer for protection," he explained. The cave mouth seemed to inhale as we entered, a subtle shift in air pressure that made our ears pop. The temperature continued to drop, and our headlamp beams seemed dimmer than they should be, barely penetrating the unnatural darkness. About 20 yards in, the passage widened into a chamber. Our lights revealed ancient paintings covering the walls, depictions of the Wendigo and rituals to contain it. In the center of the chamber stood a stone altar, its surface stained dark. "This is where the binding ritual would be performed," Jack explained. Sarah was examining the wall paintings. "These symbols, Some of them match the ones from your grandfather's journal. I approached the altar, my light revealing grooves carved into the stone surface, channels designed to direct flowing liquid. I didn't need to ask what kind of liquid they were meant for. A scraping sound echoed from deeper in the cave system, like claws on stone. We froze, listening as it grew louder, closer. "It's here," Jack whispered. The temperature plunged further. Our headlamps flickered, threatening to leave us in total darkness. And from a tunnel at the far side of the chamber came a sound that would haunt my nightmares forever, a hideous blend of animal growl and human laughter. Then, stepping into the edge of our failing light beams, we saw it. 8 feet tall, emaciated yet somehow powerful, with skin stretched tight over an inhuman frame. Its head bore the skull of a deer, antlers extending like a crown of bones. Where eyes should be, only dark, empty sockets that somehow still conveyed malevolent intelligence. Its mouth, its mouth, stretched in a grin too wide for any human face, filled with needle-like teeth. Behind it, barely visible in the darkness, huddled 4 figures, the Martin family, alive but terrified beyond reason. The Wendigo tilted its head, studying us with those empty sockets. Then it spoke using David Martin's voice. They came to see nature. Now they're becoming part of it. It stepped forward, its movements jerky yet fluid, like a marionette controlled by an unskilled puppeteer. The air around it shimmered with cold so intense it burned. "You know why I chose them, don't you, Michael?" It continued, now using my voice. "The same reason I chose you. The darkness inside, the hunger." Sarah raised her rifle, but Jack pushed the barrel down. "Bullets won't stop it." The Wendigo laughed, a sound like breaking ice and snapping bones. "The old man is right. Nothing stops hunger. Nothing stops me." It lunged forward with impossible speed. I shoved Sarah aside as claws raked the air where she had stood. Jack threw something from his pouch, herbs or tobacco, that burst into flame upon contact with the creature, causing it to shriek and recoil. "The altar," Jack shouted. "We need to lure it there." Sarah fired her rifle despite Jack's warning. The bullet struck the Wendigo's chest, causing it to stagger but not fall. Black ichor oozed from the wound. "Get the family," I yelled to Sarah, drawing my knife, a pathetically inadequate weapon against this horror. As Sarah darted around the chamber's edge toward the huddled Martins, I moved in the opposite direction, drawing the Wendigo's attention. "You said you chose me," I called to it, backing toward the altar. "Why, what darkness do you see in me?" The creature followed, its movements becoming more fluid, more predatory. "You already know, Ranger. The incident 3 winters ago. The hikers you couldn't save. The ones you found too late." A cold realization washed over me. It was reading my deepest regrets, my most painful memories. "That wasn't his fault," Sarah shouted, having reached the Martin family and begun untying them. "Everyone has darkness," the Wendigo replied, still stalking toward me. "Everyone has hunger. Yours is for redemption, Michael. An insatiable appetite that can never be filled." I continued backing up until I felt the stone altar behind me. Jack had circled around and was frantically drawing symbols on the floor with a piece of charcoal, recreating patterns from the wall paintings. "You failed before," the Wendigo taunted. "You'll fail again. The family will die. Your friends will die. All because you weren't good enough, fast enough, brave enough." Its words cut deeper than its claws could, because part of me believed them. But as I looked past the creature to Sarah helping the terrified Martin family, something hardened inside me. "You're wrong," I said. "I may have failed before, but not today." I leapt aside as the Wendigo charged. It crashed into the altar, momentarily stunned. Jack completed the symbol circle and began chanting in his native language, his voice rising with power and conviction. The temperature dropped even further. Ice formed on the walls, cracking the ancient paintings. The Wendigo recovered and turned toward Jack, recognizing the greater threat. "Now, Michael," Jack shouted between chants. "The binding requires blood freely given." I understood immediately. Drawing my knife across my palm, I let blood drip onto the altar and the symbols Jack had drawn. The effect was immediate. The symbols began to glow with a blue-white light, and the Wendigo shrieked in rage and what sounded almost like fear. An invisible force seemed to pull the creature toward the altar. It fought against it, claws scrabbling on the stone floor, leaving deep gouges. The Martin family, now free from their bonds, huddled against the far wall with Sarah protectively in front of them. "Keep going," I shouted to Jack, whose chanting had reached a fever pitch. The Wendigo fixed those empty eye sockets on me. "This prison won't hold me forever, Michael Thompson. I'll remember you. I'll find you again." "Maybe," I acknowledged, "but not today." With a final bone-chilling howl, the creature was slammed against the altar by unseen forces. Ice crystals formed around it, encasing its limbs, then its torso, finally its skull-like head. The blue-white light from the symbols intensified until we had to shield our eyes. When the light faded, the Wendigo was gone, or rather transformed. In its place stood a grotesque ice sculpture, every detail of its horrific form perfectly preserved in crystalline stasis. Jack's chanting subsided, and he collapsed to his knees, exhausted. "It's done," he gasped. "Bound again, but not forever. Never forever." The Martin family wept with relief, clinging to each other and to Sarah, who looked as shell-shocked as I felt. "Is it dead?" Mrs. Martin asked, her voice hoarse from screaming. "No," Jack answered honestly, "but it's contained. The binding will hold for years, perhaps decades if we're fortunate." I approached the frozen Wendigo cautiously. Even in this state, I could feel malevolence radiating from it like cold from an iceberg. "We need to station guards," I said. "Set up a perimeter. Make sure no one ever comes here again." Jack nodded solemnly. "My people will help. This responsibility has been ours for generations." As we led the traumatized, but miraculously unharmed Martin family from the cave, I couldn't shake the Wendigo's final words. It would remember me. It would wait. And someday, perhaps long after I was gone, it would hunger again. 3 months later, I sat in my cabin on the eastern edge of Yellowstone, watching the first autumn leaves drift from the aspens. My hand, still bearing the scar from the binding ritual, ached in the cooling air, a constant reminder of what lurked beneath the park's beauty. The official report on the Martin family incident cited exposure, disorientation, and mass hallucination induced by toxic fungi. A convenient explanation crafted jointly by park administration and Jack's tribal elders. The Martins themselves, after extensive debriefing and psychiatric evaluation, had agreed to the official narrative, too traumatized to fight for a truth no one would believe anyway. Sarah knocked on my door, entering with 2 cups of coffee. Since that night in the cave, we'd grown closer, united by a shared experience few could understand. "Rodriguez called," she said, settling into the chair opposite mine. "Another temperature anomaly near Lamar Valley. 3rd one this month." I nodded, unsurprised. "Within the established perimeter?" "Yes, but getting closer to the boundary. Jack's people say the binding is holding. But the Wendigo is testing its limits," I finished. After our encounter, Jack had shared more of his grandfather's journal, revealing a cycle we now found ourselves part of. The Wendigo had been bound before, many times throughout history. Each binding lasted longer than a human lifetime, but never permanently. And each time it broke free, it emerged stronger, smarter, more determined. "The new monitoring stations are online," Sarah continued, pulling out her tablet to show me a map of the park with dozens of temperature sensors marked in red. "If it attempts to breach the perimeter, we'll have advance warning." I traced the scar on my palm. "Warning won't be enough. We need to be ready." Since the incident, I'd thrown myself into research, collecting folklore from tribes across North America about similar entities. Jack had introduced me to elders from other nations who shared their knowledge of binding rituals and containment methods. I'd compiled everything into a manual, a guidebook for future rangers who might face what we had. The special training program starts next month, Sarah reminded me. 10 rangers from across the national park system, hand-picked, discreet. And skeptical, no doubt, I added with a grim smile. Until they visit the cave. No one could stand before that frozen horror and remain skeptical. We'd established a secure facility around the cave entrance, disguised as an environmental research station, with round-the-clock guards drawn from both park rangers and tribal members. Only those with special clearance could enter, and only after extensive psychological evaluation. Because the Wendigo fed on weakness, on darkness within. Anyone harboring significant trauma or guilt could become its conduit to freedom, including me. Jack called this morning, I told Sarah. He's been translating some older texts. Apparently the blood bond works both ways. The binding ritual connected me to it somehow. Sarah's expression tightened with concern. What does that mean exactly? I dream of it sometimes, I admitted. I feel its hunger, its rage, its patience. I hadn't told anyone about these dreams before, not even Sarah. It's waiting, gathering strength, and it knows me now, knows how I think. Mike, maybe you should take a leave of absence. Get some distance. That's exactly what it wants, I interrupted. For me to run, to hide, to pretend it isn't real. Distance won't break the connection. The truth was more complicated than I could express. In those dreams, the Wendigo whispered to me, promised me things, power, knowledge, freedom from fear. It probed my deepest insecurities and regrets, offering resolution if only I would help release it. So far, I'd resisted. But each night, its arguments grew more persuasive, more personal. There's something else, Sarah said, interrupting my dark thoughts. The historical research you requested came through. There have been patterns. She handed me a folder containing old newspaper clippings, ranger reports, and tribal accounts dating back to the park's founding. Disappearances, mysterious deaths. Reports of wild men or forest demons appeared in clusters spanning roughly 50 to 70 years, consistent with the binding cycle Jack had described. It's happened before, I murmured. Many times, and each time there were people who fought it, who bound it again. Sarah placed her hand over mine. You're not alone in this, Mike. That evening, after Sarah left, I stood on my porch watching the sunset paint Yellowstone's mountains gold and crimson. The beauty of this place had always moved me, had drawn me to become a ranger in the first place. Now I understood I wasn't just protecting the wilderness from human harm, I was protecting humans from what lurked within the wilderness. As darkness fell, I felt that familiar cold sensation, like being watched from just beyond the light. A branch snapped in the forest beyond my cabin, probably a deer or elk. But I found myself reaching for the special pack I now kept by the door, containing Jack's herbs, iron implements, and my own blood stored in vials. I know you're there, I called into the darkness. I know you're listening, and I want you to know something. I'll be ready when you return. Only silence answered. But as I turned to go inside, I noticed frost forming on my porch railing in August. And faintly carried on a wind that shouldn't exist, I heard my own voice whisper back, "So will I, Michael Thompson. So will I." The wilderness holds many secrets, beauty and terror alike. I've seen both now, and I can never unsee them. The tourists who visit Yellowstone marvel at its wonders, unaware of what sleeps beneath their feet, bound by ancient magic and modern vigilance. They say knowledge is power. But some knowledge is a burden, a responsibility that can never be set down. As I closed my cabin door against the unnatural cold, I understood that my life had fundamentally changed. I was no longer just a park ranger. I was a warden of older, darker boundaries. And somewhere in the depths of Yellowstone, frozen but aware, the Wendigo waited for me to fail. I don't intend to. I've always found peace in isolation. After 30 years as a park ranger across the country, I've learned to appreciate the quiet moments between the chaos of tourist seasons. My name is Alex Johnson, and I've been at Yosemite for the last decade. The granite faces of El Capitan and Half Dome have become more familiar to me than the lines on my own weathered face. It started on a Wednesday night in late October. The fog had rolled in thick, blanketing the valley floor in a milky haze that muffled sound and distorted perspective. I was finishing paperwork in my cabin when the call came through. "Alex, it's Meredith at Dispatch. Got another report from the Mariposa Grove area, third one this week." I sighed, rubbing my eyes. "Let me guess. Strange noises, missing equipment. Worse this time. Family of 4 claims they saw something in the trees, said it had wings and red eyes. The dad's pretty shaken up, says it was watching their kids." I should have dismissed it. Wildlife sightings get exaggerated all the time by visitors unaccustomed to the wilderness, but something in Meredith's voice gave me pause. "Any rangers closer to the area?" "Everyone's tied up with that search and rescue near Vernal Fall. You're it, unless you want to wait till morning." I glanced at my watch, 11:47 p.m. "I'll check it out. Tell them I'm on my way." The drive through the park at midnight was eerie. Headlights carved a tunnel through the dense fog, the massive sequoias appearing and vanishing like sentinels standing guard. The radio crackled with static, and I switched it off, preferring the silence. As I approached Mariposa Grove, I noticed how unnaturally quiet it had become. October nights in Yosemite are typically alive with sound: owls calling, crickets chirping, the rustle of nocturnal creatures. But tonight, nothing. Complete silence pressed against my eardrums like cotton. I parked at the trailhead and grabbed my gear: flashlight, radio, first aid kit, and, though park policy discouraged it, my personal sidearm. 30 years in the wilderness teaches you to trust your instincts, and tonight, mine was screaming. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Johnson. I'm at Mariposa Grove, beginning investigation of reported wildlife sighting." "Copy that, Alex. Check in every 20 minutes. The fog had settled between the massive trunks of the sequoias, creating an otherworldly landscape. My flashlight beam seemed swallowed by the mist, illuminating only a few feet ahead. The silence was deafening. I followed the main trail, scanning for signs of disturbance. About half a mile in, I noticed the first anomaly: a patch of ground, where the fallen pine needles had been swept away in a circular pattern, as if by a powerful downdraft. Kneeling, I examined the area. The soil was compacted, almost crystallized, like it had been subjected to extreme cold. I touched it with my bare hand and jerked back immediately. The ground was frigid, at least 20 degrees colder than the surrounding area. That's when I felt it. A temperature drop so sudden it stole my breath. The air went from crisp autumn night to bitter winter in seconds. My exhalations clouded heavily before me. "What the hell?" I muttered, watching frost form on the sleeve of my jacket. A crack echoed through the grove, the unmistakable sound of a massive branch breaking under strain. I swung my flashlight upward toward the canopy. The beam caught something moving between the trees, something large and dark. I tracked it, struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. It wasn't a bear or mountain lion. It moved differently, almost floating between the massive trunks. Then it stopped and turned. 2 glowing red orbs pierced the darkness, floating about 9 feet above the ground. Not the reflected eyeshine of an animal. These were self-illuminating, pulsing with an internal light that reminded me of hot coals. I stood frozen, my training momentarily forgotten as I struggled to categorize what I was seeing. The shape unfurled what appeared to be massive wings, spanning at least 10 feet across. The silhouette was unnervingly humanoid. 2 arms, 2 legs and a head, but all wrong in proportion and movement. "This is Ranger Johnson," I whispered into my radio, eyes never leaving the creature. "I've encountered." I paused, unsure how to describe it. "An unknown entity in Mariposa Grove, requesting immediate backup." Only static answered. The radio was dead. The creature's head tilted, an eerily human gesture of curiosity. The red eyes blinked once, and then it launched itself upward with terrifying speed, disappearing into the canopy with a sound like tearing canvas. I stood motionless for several minutes, flashlight trained on the spot where it had vanished. My heart hammered against my ribs, and for the first time in decades I felt like an intruder in the wilderness I'd sworn to protect. This wasn't a bear or a mountain lion or any animal native to the Sierra Nevadas. This was something else entirely. I thought of the old stories I'd heard from a Miwok elder years ago, warnings about a winged creature that appeared before disasters, a harbinger of catastrophe. I dismissed them as folklore, the kind of campfire tale that every wilderness area accumulates over time. Now, standing alone in the silent grove, I wasn't so certain. My radio crackled to life, making me jump. "Alex? Alex, do you copy? You missed your check-in." I raised the radio with a shaking hand. "I'm here. Something's happening in Mariposa Grove. Something I can't explain." "Say again? You're breaking up." "I'm heading back to the vehicle. Meet me at headquarters in 30 minutes. As I turned to leave, my flashlight beam caught something on the massive trunk of the nearest sequoia. A series of parallel gouges in the bark, fresh enough that sap still oozed from the wounds. The marks started 8 feet up the trunk and ran downward, as if something with massive claws had landed there and slid to the ground. I touched one of the marks. The sap was cold, almost frozen. "There's something in the sequoias," I whispered to myself. "Something that shouldn't be here." The following morning brought clear skies and rational thought. In the fluorescent light of the ranger station, my midnight encounter seemed less supernatural and more likely the product of fatigue and fog. Park Superintendent Monica Reeves certainly thought so. Temperature inversions happen all the time in the valley. Alex. And the marks could be from a bear. I pushed the photos across her desk, the circular pattern on the ground, the claw marks on the sequoia. "Bears don't leave downdraft patterns, Monica. And these claw marks are spaced too wide." Monica sighed, removing her glasses. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I hesitated. 30 years of credibility was on the line. "I don't know yet. But there's something unusual happening in Mariposa Grove." "Well, whatever it is, keep it quiet. The last thing we need is panic among the visitors or, God forbid, some cryptid hunters trampling protected areas." I nodded, though the dismissal stung. "I'd like permission to set up cameras in the area." "Fine. But this stays between us until you have concrete evidence." That afternoon, I recruited Jake Mendoza, a wildlife biologist who'd been studying the park's black bear population. At 28, he had the enthusiasm I'd lost somewhere along the way, and more importantly, he had access to high-quality trail cameras. "So, what exactly are we looking for?" Jake asked as we hiked to the spot of my encounter. "I'll know it when I see it again," I replied, unwilling to sound crazy by mentioning glowing red eyes and massive wingspans. We set up 6 cameras in a perimeter around the area, angling them toward the tree canopy rather than the ground. Jake gave me curious looks but didn't question my instructions. "These have infrared capability," he explained, mounting the last camera. "If anything moves through here at night, we'll catch it." "Good. Let's check the data in the morning." Jake cleared his throat. "Mind telling me what spooked you? I've never seen you this on edge." I considered deflecting, but decided partial truth was better than none. I saw something last night that didn't match any wildlife profile I'm familiar with. Large, winged, moved between the trees with unusual speed. Bat, maybe? We have western mastiff bats in the park. This was much larger than any bat. And the eyes? I shook my head. Just help me monitor these cameras. If it's nothing, I owe you a beer. Jake looked skeptical but nodded. You got it, boss. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those red eyes in the darkness of my cabin, feeling the unnatural cold that had accompanied the creature's presence. Around 2 a.m., I gave up and drove back to the grove, drawn by something I couldn't articulate. The night was clear, stars visible through the canopy. No fog to play tricks on my perception this time. I parked at the trailhead and sat in my vehicle, windows down, listening. An hour passed. Nothing unusual. I was starting to feel foolish when a sound cut through the night. A high-pitched keening, almost beyond the range of human hearing. It rose and fell like a distorted whale song, echoing through the grove. I grabbed my gear and headed down the trail, moving as quietly as possible. The sound grew louder as I approached our camera setup. Something was moving through the trees ahead, creating a subtle disturbance in the canopy. I clicked off my flashlight and crouched behind a fallen log, waiting. The keening stopped abruptly. In the silence that followed, I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. A shadow detached itself from the canopy and descended to the forest floor about 50 yards ahead. In the moonlight, I could make out a vaguely humanoid shape, but the proportions were wrong, limbs too long, torso too narrow. And on its back, folded now, were massive, membranous wings. It moved with an unnatural grace, seeming to glide rather than walk. The creature approached one of our cameras, head tilted in that same curious gesture I'd seen the night before. Then, with deliberate precision, it reached out and twisted the camera from its mount, examining it in what appeared to be hands with elongated fingers. I fumbled for my phone, desperate to document what I was seeing. As I raised it to take a photo, the creature's head snapped in my direction. 2 crimson eyes blazed in the darkness. The temperature plummeted. My phone died instantly, the battery drained to 0. Frost formed on the fallen log beneath my hands. The creature unfurled its wings. 15 feet of leathery membrane stretched between bony appendages. It wasn't the wings of a bat or bird. The structure was all wrong, more like the wings of an enormous moth or butterfly, but substantial, powerful. It took a step toward me, and I found myself unable to move, transfixed by those glowing eyes. A pressure built in my head, a buzzing that grew louder until it seemed to fill the world. The creature opened what I assumed was its mouth, revealing not teeth, but something like a proboscis that uncoiled grotesquely. The buzzing intensified, and I realized with horror that it was attempting some form of communication. Images flashed through my mind. The dam at Hetch Hetchy rupturing, the valley floor submerged, bodies floating among the debris. I saw El Capitan crumbling, massive sheets of granite sliding into the valley. I saw fire consuming the sequoia grove, ancient trees exploding from the heat. I clapped my hands over my ears, though I knew the sound wasn't coming through them. "Stop," I gasped. "I don't understand." The buzzing ceased. The creature retracted its proboscis and stepped back, wings folding against its body. It placed the camera carefully on the ground, then launched itself upward with that same tearing canvas sound, disappearing into the canopy. I remained crouched behind the log, shaking violently for what seemed like hours. When I finally found the courage to move, I discovered the camera had been completely dismantled, its components arranged in a precise pattern on the forest floor. The memory card was missing. I gathered the pieces as evidence and retreated to my vehicle. As I drove back to headquarters, a single thought circled my mind. The creature hadn't acted aggressively. It had been curious, examining our technology, attempting communication, and it had shown me visions of disaster. "They're completely drained," Jake said. examining our recovered cameras the next morning. Not just the batteries, it's like every electronic component has been wiped clean. I've never seen anything like it. We were in his lab at the research station, surrounded by the dismantled remains of our surveillance equipment. 5 of the 6 cameras had been found in the same condition, taken apart, components arranged in geometric patterns, memory cards missing. "And you're sure it wasn't vandals?" Jake asked, though his voice suggested he was running out of rational explanations. I shook my head. "I saw it happen. The same creature from the first night." Jake put down his tools and faced me. "Alex, I've worked with you for 4 years. You're the most level-headed ranger in this park. If you say you saw something, I believe you. But what exactly are we dealing with here?" I hesitated, then pulled out my phone and showed him an image I'd found online. "Does this look familiar?" The image was an artist's rendering of the Mothman, a winged humanoid figure with glowing red eyes. According to folklore, it had been sighted in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in the 1960s, appearing repeatedly before the Silver Bridge collapse killed 46 people. Jake studied the image, his skepticism visible. "Cryptozoology isn't exactly my field." "I know how it sounds," I admitted, "but the similarities are undeniable. And last night, when it tried to communicate, I saw visions of disasters in the park, the dam breaking, rock slides, fires." Jake was silent for a long moment. "If, and that's a big if, this thing is real and showing you potential disasters, the question is it warning you or threatening you?" The question hit home. I'd been so focused on documenting the creature that I hadn't considered its intentions. The legends say it appears before disasters, not that it causes them. Well, either way, we need more data before taking this to Reeves. Jake gestured to the dismantled cameras, and our usual methods clearly aren't working. I nodded, an idea forming. "We need to try direct observation. Tonight, I'm going back to the Grove and I want you with me. No cameras, no phones, just field notebooks and our eyes." Jake looked uneasy but agreed. "I'm in, but I'm bringing my analog SLR camera. No electronics for it to fry." That evening we prepared carefully. Layers of warm clothing to combat the unnatural cold, mechanical watches instead of digital, pencils rather than pens that might freeze, and Jake's old Nikon film camera. We arrived at Mariposa Grove just after sunset. "We should position ourselves near the grizzly giant," I suggested, referring to one of the largest sequoias in the grove. "That's where I first noticed the temperature drop." We hiked in silence, the fading light casting long shadows through the ancient trees. As darkness fell, that same unnatural quiet descended, no insects chirping, no owls calling. Just the sound of our breathing and footsteps on the pine needle carpet. We settled at the base of the massive sequoia, backs against its 5-foot-thick trunk, and waited. Hours passed. Jake dozed occasionally, but I remained alert, scanning the canopy for movement. Around 1 a.m., my watch stopped. The second hand froze mid-tick, and my breath began to cloud before me. "Jake," I whispered, nudging him awake. "It's happening." He blinked awake, immediately registering the temperature drop. "Holy shit," he breathed, reaching for his camera. The keening sound started again, oscillating through frequencies that made my teeth ache. Jake winced beside me, hands over his ears. "What is that?" he hissed. Before I could answer, a dark shape descended from the canopy, landing with surprising delicacy about 30 yards from our position. In the moonlight, we could see it clearly, a figure standing nearly 8 feet tall, with a slender, elongated body. Its skin seemed to absorb light, creating a silhouette darker than the surrounding night. The wings unfurled partially, adjusting for balance as it moved. And the eyes, 2 glowing red orbs that seemed to pierce the darkness and look directly into my soul. Jake raised his camera with trembling hands and took a photo. The click of the shutter seemed impossibly loud in the silence. The creature's head snapped toward us, eyes flaring brighter. Jake took another photo and another, the mechanical film advance whirring. The buzzing in my head returned, accompanied by a pressure that made my sinuses ache. Images flooded my consciousness, water roaring through Yosemite Valley, trees uprooted, buildings crushed. But this time, there was more. I saw the specific location where the disaster would begin, Pohono Bridge, the westernmost bridge in the valley. The bridge, I gasped, gripping Jake's arm. It's showing me Pohono Bridge. Jake lowered his camera, his face pale. What about it? Something's going to happen there. Something bad. The creature took a step closer and Jake raised his camera again, but I pushed it down. Wait, I said, standing slowly. I think it's trying to warn us. I took a cautious step forward, hands raised to show I meant no harm. The buzzing in my head intensified, but I pushed through it, focusing on the image of the bridge. Pohono Bridge, I said clearly, meeting those red eyes. Is that where it starts? The creature's head tilted and the buzzing changed tone, becoming almost melodic. More images appeared in my mind, a timeline. Midnight tomorrow. Heavy rainfall. The bridge supports weakening, then failing catastrophically as a tour bus crosses. Dozens of lives lost in the initial collapse, hundreds more as the flooding ravages the valley. Tomorrow night, I whispered. The bridge is going to collapse tomorrow night. The creature's wings extended fully, the motion creating a gust of cold air that knocked us back against the sequoia trunk. It rose into the air with that now familiar sound of tearing canvas, circled once overhead, then vanished into the night sky. Jake stood frozen, camera clutched to his chest. What the hell just happened, Alex? It showed me a disaster, I replied, already pulling out my field notebook. And we have less than 24 hours to prevent it. This is insane, Superintendent Reeves said, staring at us across her desk the next morning. You want me to close Pohono Bridge, reroute all park traffic, and evacuate the Western Valley based on, what, a dream? A hallucination? Jake placed his developed photographs on her desk. They were blurry, motion-smeared, but unmistakably showed something that defied conventional explanation. A tall, winged silhouette with 2 points of light where eyes should be. It wasn't a hallucination, I insisted. Both of us experienced it, and these photos prove something was there. Reeves picked up one of the photos, studying it. This proves nothing except that something was in the woods. Could be an owl, light reflection, anything. Monica, I leaned forward, using her first name to emphasize the urgency. In 30 years, have I ever brought you something without solid reason? She sighed, rubbing her temples. No, but you're asking for a major operation based on cryptid folklore. I'm asking you to take precautions. The National Weather Service has already issued flash flood warnings for the area tonight. The river's running high from the rainfall upriver. If there's even a chance the bridge could fail. We inspect all bridges regularly, she interrupted. Pohono was checked just last month. Then send a structural engineer today, Jake suggested. If Alex is wrong, you lose nothing. If he's right. Reeves was silent for a long moment. Finally, she nodded. I'll send Martinez out there with the engineering team, but I'm not closing the bridge unless they find something concrete. It was a compromise I could live with. Thank you. 3 hours later, Martinez, the park's head of maintenance, called with his report. I put him on speaker so Jake could hear. We're at Pohono Bridge now, Martinez said, his voice partially obscured by the sound of rushing water. The recent rainfall has the Merced running about 4 feet higher than normal. What about the bridge supports? I asked. That's why I'm calling. We've found some concerning erosion around the eastern foundation. Nothing critical yet, but if this rain continues... I exchanged glances with Jake. How bad is it? Bad enough that I wouldn't want a fully loaded bus crossing during peak flow. I've already requested temporary weight restrictions. Reeves, who had been listening from across the room, approached the phone. Martinez, this is Reeves. I want hourly updates on the bridge condition. If you see any further deterioration, I want to know immediately." "Yes, ma'am." After the call ended, Reeves turned to us, her expression grave. "I'm not saying I believe in your Mothman, but I can't ignore Martinez's assessment." "We need to close the bridge," I insisted. "Weight restrictions aren't enough." "I'll close it if the situation worsens," she countered. "For now, let's not panic the thousands of visitors in the park." I wanted to argue further, but knew pushing too hard would only make her more resistant. "At least let me station rangers at both ends of the bridge tonight. If things deteriorate quickly, we'll need to act fast." She nodded. "Agreed. You and Mendoza take the first shift, starting at 8 p.m. As we left her office, Jake whispered, "She's still not taking this seriously enough." "No," I agreed. "But it's a start, and we'll be there when it happens." Throughout the day, the rain intensified. By evening it was a downpour, swelling creeks and turning trails into muddy rivers. The Merced had risen another 2 feet. Its usual gentle flow transformed into a churning brown torrent that carried branches and debris from upstream. Jake and I positioned ourselves at the eastern end of Pajono Bridge. Rain ponchos doing little to keep us dry in the deluge. Martinez and his team had installed wooden barriers that could be quickly moved into place if needed. But traffic was still flowing across the bridge, mostly visitors leaving the park ahead of the storm. "Look at the water level," Jake shouted over the roar of the river. "It's already reaching the lower supports." I nodded grimly, watching as a small sedan crossed the bridge, its headlights cutting weakly through the curtain of rain. My watch read 9:47 p.m. According to my vision, we had just over 2 hours before catastrophe struck. At 10:30 p.m., Martinez arrived with bad news. "The erosion's accelerating. I've got 3 support columns showing critical stress fractures." "We need to close the bridge now," I insisted. Martinez nodded. "I've already called Reeves. She's given the authorization." We moved quickly, positioning the barriers and setting up flashing warning lights. Park rangers at the western end were doing the same. Within minutes, the bridge was closed to all traffic, with temporary detour signs directing vehicles to alternate routes. By 11:15 p.m., the rain had become biblical. The Merced was now just 6 feet below the bridge deck, roaring past with frightening power. Trees torn from the riverbank upstream crashed against the bridge supports, each impact sending vibrations through the structure. "It's going to fail," Jake said, staring at the straining bridge. "Just like you saw." I nodded, feeling no satisfaction in being proven right. But at least no one will be on it when it happens. At 11:45 p.m., headlights appeared on the western approach to the bridge, a large vehicle moving steadily toward the barricades. "What the hell?" Martinez raised his flashlight, signaling for the vehicle to stop. It was a tour bus, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. It rolled to a stop just short of the barriers and the door opened. A man in a rain-slicked jacket hurried toward us. "What's going on?" he demanded. "We need to get through. I have 40 tourists who need to reach their hotel." "Bridge is closed," Martinez shouted back. "Structural concerns. You'll have to take the northern route around." "That's an extra hour in this weather," the driver protested. "Better than being in the river," I replied, motioning toward the churning water below. The driver seemed ready to argue further when a sound cut through the storm, a high-pitched keening that raised the hair on the back of my neck. Jake grabbed my arm, eyes wide. "It's here," he whispered. The driver and Martinez hadn't noticed, still arguing about alternate routes, but I scanned the rainy darkness and saw it, a dark shape perched atop one of the trees overlooking the bridge, red eyes glowing like embers. As we watched, a massive section of debris, an entire tree trunk, slammed into one of the compromised support columns. The bridge shuddered visibly, a deep groan of metal and concrete rising above the river's roar. "Everyone back!" I shouted, grabbing the driver's jacket and pulling him away from the bridge approach. Martinez got on his radio, alerting the rangers on the western side. "Bridge failure imminent. Clear the area." The bus driver's face went pale as he finally understood the danger. He ran back to his vehicle, presumably to move it to safer ground. Jake and I retreated to our patrol vehicle, watching as small chunks of concrete began to fall from the bridge's underside. The Mothman remained perched on its tree, wings partially extended, observing. At exactly midnight, with a sound like thunder, the eastern support of Pohono Bridge gave way. The structure twisted grotesquely, the roadbed tilting into the furious river below. Metal screamed as it tore, and the concrete deck fractured along its length. In less than 30 seconds, the historic bridge was gone, swept downstream in the floodwaters, leaving only broken stumps of concrete where it had stood for decades. "Oh my God," Jake breathed, his camera forgotten in his hands. "If that bus had been crossing..." I nodded, unable to speak as I watched the destruction. Then I turned my attention back to the tree where the Mothman had been perched. It was gone. The morning after the bridge collapse dawned clear and bright, as if the previous night's deluge had never happened. The Merced River still ran high and fast, but the rain had stopped, allowing emergency and assessment teams to work safely. I stood with Superintendent Reeves at the eastern approach to where Pohono Bridge had stood for nearly a century, now just a memory and a gap in the road. "Preliminary engineering assessment confirms what we suspected," she said, reviewing the report in her hands. The support columns had been compromised by previously undetected erosion. Last night's flooding was the final straw. I nodded, watching as divers searched the riverbed downstream for bridge remnants. If we hadn't closed it when we did... "I know." Reeves folded the report and fixed me with a steady gaze. "You saved lives last night, Alex. However you knew, whatever prompted your concern, I'm grateful you pushed the issue." It was as close to an acknowledgement of the Mothman as I was likely to get from her, and I accepted it with a nod. "What happens to the official report?" I asked. "It will state that routine inspection revealed potential structural concerns leading to preemptive closure before the catastrophic failure." She paused. "Your other observations will remain between us." "And Jake's photographs? Mr. Mendoza has agreed to turn over all copies to Park Archives. They'll be classified as part of the incident documentation." I wasn't surprised. Jake had been unusually quiet since the collapse, spending hours in his lab developing the remainder of his film roll. The images he'd shown me were remarkable, clear shots of a winged humanoid figure observing the bridge from various vantage points. In the final frame, taken moments before the collapse, the creature was captured in flight, wings fully extended against the night sky, eyes blazing. Evidence that would never see the light of day. "There's something I need to do," I told Reeves. "A final check on Mariposa Grove." She studied my face, then nodded. "Take the day. I think you've earned it." The grove was peaceful in the morning light, water droplets from the previous night's rain creating prisms among the massive branches of the sequoias. I hiked to the spot where I'd first encountered the Mothman, half expecting to find it waiting. Instead, I found something else, the missing memory cards from our cameras, arranged in a perfect circle at the base of the grizzly giant. In the center of the circle lay a single feather unlike any I'd seen before, nearly a foot long, iridescent black with an almost metallic sheen. "It's going to fail," Jake said, staring at the straining bridge. "Just like you saw." I nodded, feeling no satisfaction in being proven right. But at least no one will be on it when it happens. At 11:45 p.m., headlights appeared on the western approach to the bridge, a large vehicle moving steadily toward the barricades. "What the hell?" Martinez raised his flashlight, signaling for the vehicle to stop. It was a tour bus, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. It rolled to a stop just short of the barriers and the door opened. A man in a rain-slicked jacket hurried toward us. "What's going on?" he demanded. "We need to get through. I have 40 tourists who need to reach their hotel." "Bridge is closed," Martinez shouted back. "Structural concerns. You'll have to take the northern route around." "That's an extra hour in this weather," the driver protested. "Better than being in the river," I replied, motioning toward the churning water below. The driver seemed ready to argue further when a sound cut through the storm, a high-pitched keening that raised the hair on the back of my neck. Jake grabbed my arm, eyes wide. "It's here," he whispered. The driver and Martinez hadn't noticed, still arguing about alternate routes, but I scanned the rainy darkness and saw it, a dark shape perched atop one of the trees overlooking the bridge, red eyes glowing like embers. As we watched, a massive section of debris, an entire tree trunk, slammed into one of the compromised support columns. The bridge shuddered visibly, a deep groan of metal and concrete rising above the river's roar. "Everyone back!" I shouted, grabbing the driver's jacket and pulling him away from the bridge approach. Martinez got on his radio, alerting the rangers on the western side. "Bridge failure imminent. Clear the area." The bus driver's face went pale as he finally understood the danger. He ran back to his vehicle, presumably to move it to safer ground. Jake and I retreated to our patrol vehicle, watching as small chunks of concrete began to fall from the bridge's underside. The Mothman remained perched on its tree, wings partially extended, observing. At exactly midnight, with a sound like thunder, the eastern support of Pohono Bridge gave way. The structure twisted grotesquely, the roadbed tilting into the furious river below. Metal screamed as it tore, and the concrete deck fractured along its length. In less than 30 seconds, the historic bridge was gone, swept downstream in the floodwaters, leaving only broken stumps of concrete where it had stood for decades. "Oh my God," Jake breathed, his camera forgotten in his hands. "If that bus had been crossing..." I nodded, unable to speak as I watched the destruction. Then I turned my attention back to the tree where the Mothman had been perched. It was gone. The morning after the bridge collapse dawned clear and bright, as if the previous night's deluge had never happened. The Merced River still ran high and fast, but the rain had stopped, allowing emergency and assessment teams to work safely. I stood with Superintendent Reeves at the eastern approach to where Pohono Bridge had stood for nearly a century, now just a memory and a gap in the road. "Preliminary engineering assessment confirms what we suspected," she said, reviewing the report in her hands. The support columns had been compromised by previously undetected erosion. Last night's flooding was the final straw. I nodded, watching as divers searched the riverbed downstream for bridge remnants. If we hadn't closed it when we did... "I know." Reeves folded the report and fixed me with a steady gaze. "You saved lives last night, Alex. However you knew, whatever prompted your concern, I'm grateful you pushed the issue." It was as close to an acknowledgement of the Mothman as I was likely to get from her, and I accepted it with a nod. "What happens to the official report?" I asked. "It will state that routine inspection revealed potential structural concerns leading to preemptive closure before the catastrophic failure." She paused. "Your other observations will remain between us." "And Jake's photographs. Mr. Mendoza has agreed to turn over all copies to Park Archives. They'll be classified as part of the incident documentation." I wasn't surprised. Jake had been unusually quiet since the collapse, spending hours in his lab developing the remainder of his film roll. The images he'd shown me were remarkable, clear shots of a winged humanoid figure observing the bridge from various vantage points. In the final frame, taken moments before the collapse, the creature was captured in flight, wings fully extended against the night sky, eyes blazing. Evidence that would never see the light of day. "There's something I need to do," I told Reeves. "A final check on Mariposa Grove." She studied my face, then nodded. "Take the day. I think you've earned it." The grove was peaceful in the morning light, water droplets from the previous night's rain creating prisms among the massive branches of the sequoias. I hiked to the spot where I'd first encountered the Mothman, half expecting to find it waiting. Instead, I found something else, the missing memory cards from our cameras, arranged in a perfect circle at the base of the grizzly giant. In the center of the circle lay a single feather unlike any I'd seen before, nearly a foot long, iridescent black with an almost metallic sheen. I knelt to examine it, hesitating before picking it up. It was impossibly lightweight, seeming to float above my palm when I finally gathered the courage to touch it. The structure was unlike bird or bat, more similar to a moth's wing scale when viewed closely, but massive and somehow both delicate and substantial. Scientific evidence of something that shouldn't exist. I carefully placed the feather in a specimen bag, then gathered the memory cards. Whether they contained usable data or had been wiped clean like the cameras themselves, I couldn't say without equipment to read them. As I straightened up, that familiar silence descended over the grove, the absence of natural sound that had preceded each of my encounters. I turned slowly, scanning the canopy above. The Mothman stood on a massive branch 50 feet above, wings folded against its back, those crimson eyes fixed on me. In daylight I could see details that darkness had obscured, the texture of its skin like polished obsidian, the articulated joints of its elongated limbs, the antenna-like structures protruding from its head. We regarded each other across the distance, neither moving. No buzzing filled my head this time, no visions of disaster, just silent acknowledgement between two sentient beings. I slowly raised my hand in a gesture of gratitude. After a moment's hesitation, the creature extended one long arm, mimicking my motion. Then it unfurled those magnificent wings, catching the morning sunlight in a display of colors I hadn't seen in our nighttime encounters. Iridescent purples, blues and greens shifting across the membranous surface. With a powerful downstroke that sent leaves swirling around me, it launched into the sky and disappeared above the canopy. I remained in the grove for another hour, but the Mothman didn't return. Eventually, I hiked back to my vehicle, the specimen bag with its impossible feathers secure in my pocket, the memory cards in my backpack. In the weeks that followed, Pohono Bridge became a reconstruction project with a newer, stronger structure designed to replace what had been lost. The official report mentioned nothing of winged creatures or supernatural warnings, attributing the timely closure to diligent inspection protocols and cautious management decisions. Jake Mendoza requested a transfer to Yellowstone 3 weeks after the incident, citing personal reasons and an interest in their wolf restoration program. Before leaving, he handed me a sealed envelope with instructions not to open it unless something similar happens again. The memory cards from the grove yielded nothing, each one wiped clean of data, as if subjected to a powerful electromagnetic pulse. The feather, however, I kept secured in a specimen case in my cabin. Out of official records, private evidence of an encounter that defied explanation. Visitors still come to Yosemite with their cameras and wonder, unaware of what watches from the ancient trees. Occasionally, I hear reports from other ranges, strange temperature drops in isolated areas, equipment malfunctioning without cause, glimpses of something large moving through the canopy at twilight. I don't investigate these reports anymore. The Mothman has its purpose, appearing when disaster looms, warning those willing to see. Not a creature of evil as some folklore suggests, but a sentinel, a harbinger that offers a chance to avert catastrophe. Some nights, when fog rolls through the valley and the visitors have retreated to their accommodations, I sit outside my cabin and scan the darkened tree line. Sometimes I catch a glimpse of 2 distant red points of light among the branches, watching, protecting, warning. And I raise my hand in silent greeting to the guardian of Yosemite, the Mothman who saved us all. Would you like me to explain or break down any aspects of this horror novel? I woke up earlier than necessary on that fateful Saturday in late September, my mind already racing with anticipation for our planned hike. The weather forecast promised clear skies, perfect conditions for exploring the renowned Cascade Falls Trail that had been on our bucket list for months. My wife Rebecca stirred beside me, blinking away sleep as sunlight filtered through our bedroom curtains. "You're already dressed," she noted with a drowsy smile. "Someone's eager." I nodded, checking my watch. Thought we'd get an early start, beat the crowds. Our 3-year-old German Shepherd, Bella, seemed to sense the day's adventure, pacing anxiously by the front door while we packed our gear, trail mix, water bottles, first aid kit, and the usual essentials. Rebecca insisted on bringing extra layers despite the warm forecast. "The temperature drops fast in those valleys," she reminded me, stuffing a fleece into her backpack. "Better safe than sorry." The drive took nearly 2 hours, winding through increasingly remote countryside. The radio signal gradually weakened until static replaced the morning news program. We fell into comfortable silence, occasionally pointing out interesting landmarks or unusual cloud formations. Bella remained vigilant in the back seat, her nose occasionally fogging the window glass as she tracked scents from the passing landscape. "Did you read that article about the search and rescue operation last month?" Rebecca asked suddenly, scrolling through her phone before the signal disappeared completely. "No, what happened?" "Some hiker went off trail about 15 miles from where we're headed. Spent 2 nights out there before they found him. Apparently he was severely dehydrated and kept rambling about strange noises." I shrugged. "Probably got disoriented. People underestimate wilderness all the time." "I suppose," she said, but her voice carried a note of uncertainty that lingered between us. The parking area was beginning to fill when we arrived, but we secured a spot near the trailhead. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, invigorating after the long drive. I stretched my legs while Rebecca organized our backpacks. Bella strained against her leash, eager to begin the journey, her tail wagging with unbridled enthusiasm. "Remember," I said, examining the trail map posted on a weathered wooden board, "we stick to the main path. No unnecessary risks today." Rebecca nodded in agreement, her earlier concerns seemingly forgotten in the beauty of the morning. Neither of us could have predicted how drastically that resolution would change, or how deeply we would come to regret the decisions made in the following hours. We joined the steady stream of hikers making their way toward Cascade Falls. The trail was wide and well-maintained near the entrance, bordered by towering Douglas firs and western red cedars that filtered the morning sunlight into dappled patterns across the path. Families with children, couples with expensive camera equipment, and solo hikers with determined expressions passed us or fell behind as we settled into a comfortable pace. "It's busier than I expected," Rebecca commented, adjusting her backpack straps. "The falls are a popular attraction," I replied. "This is why I wanted to get here early." Bella led the way, her nose working constantly as she encountered new scents. Her excitement was contagious, and I found myself smiling at her occasional backward glances, as if checking that we were still following her expert guidance. The sound of rushing water grew progressively louder, signaling our approach to the falls. Through breaks in the trees, we caught glimpses of sunlight catching the spray, creating ephemeral rainbows that appeared and vanished with the shifting breeze. The path widened into a viewing area, crowded with people taking photographs and children squealing with delight. Cascade Falls lived up to its reputation, a 60-foot torrent of water tumbling over moss-covered rocks into a clear pool below. The designated viewing platforms were packed with tourists jostling for the perfect angle, their voices competing with the thunderous cascade. Rebecca took several photos while I consulted our trail map. "There's a secondary trail that loops around the top of the falls," I pointed out. "Looks like it's less traveled." Rebecca glanced at the crowded platforms. "Might be nice to find some quieter spots." A park ranger stationed nearby overheard our conversation. "The upper trail is more challenging," he cautioned. but the views are worth it if you're experienced hikers. We are, I assured him, perhaps too quickly. How far does it extend? About 4 miles around, but there's a return path that cuts back to the main trail at the 2-mile mark, if you decide not to complete the full loop. Rebecca hesitated. Is it well marked? The first section is, the ranger replied. After that, the blazes are a bit faded. Just keep the creek on your left and you'll be fine. The decision was made with surprising ease. We filled our water bottles at the public fountain, adjusted our gear, and headed toward the narrow path that snaked upward beside the waterfall. A sign warned less experienced hikers to remain on the main trail, but we continued past it, eager to escape the noise and discover views few tourists bothered to seek. The terrain immediately became more challenging. Rocks slick with spray required careful footing, and the path narrowed until we had to proceed single file. Bella, sensing the adventure, pulled ahead with renewed enthusiasm. As we climbed higher, the crowd noise diminished, replaced by the more intimate sounds of our breathing and the water's roar. Reaching a natural ledge overlooking the falls, we paused to rest. From this vantage point, the tourists below resembled colorful insects swarming around a puddle. The forest stretched in every direction, an unbroken canopy of green that seemed to swallow the horizon. Worth the climb already, I said, taking a long drink from my water bottle. Rebecca nodded, her face flushed from exertion. It's beautiful, but listen, notice anything? I paused, taking in our surroundings more attentively. It's quieter. Not just quieter, she clarified. No birds, no insects buzzing. She was right. Apart from the waterfall's constant rush, the forest was unnaturally silent. I dismissed the observation with a shrug. Probably just the time of day. Or maybe the water noise drowns them out. Rebecca seemed unconvinced, but said nothing more as we continued our ascent. The path leveled somewhat as we moved away from the falls, diving deeper into the forest where the canopy thickened, reducing sunlight to occasional shafts that barely reached the forest floor. With each step away from the main attraction, I felt a growing sense of isolation, not unpleasant at first, but increasingly pronounced. We were leaving the safety of numbers behind, venturing into a section of forest that suddenly seemed vast and unknowable. Bella's excited trot slowed to a more cautious pace as she navigated fallen trees and protruding roots. The trail's getting harder to follow, Rebecca noted, pointing to faded blue markings on scattered trees. Should we turn back? I consulted my watch. We've only been on this section for 30 minutes. Let's push on a bit further. The ranger mentioned a particularly good viewpoint at the creek bend. That simple decision, to continue rather than return, would prove to be the first in a series of increasingly poor choices, leading us deeper into an experience that would haunt our dreams for months to come. The deeper we ventured into the forest, the more distinct the atmosphere became from the cheerful bustle at the waterfall's base. Shadows lengthened and merged beneath the dense canopy, creating a perpetual twilight that played tricks on peripheral vision. Fallen logs and rock formations took on anthropomorphic qualities in the dim light, resembling crouched figures until examined more closely. How far do you think we've gone? Rebecca asked, her voice hushed, as if respecting the forest's growing silence. I checked my GPS app, but the signal had weakened to the point of uselessness. Maybe a mile from the falls, hard to tell with all the switchbacks. The trail had narrowed further, in some places barely distinguishable from game paths that branched off in confusing directions. Blue trail blazes appeared with decreasing frequency, some so faded they required careful scrutiny to confirm their presence. Bella remained ahead of us, but had abandoned her earlier exuberance for a more methodical pace, occasionally glancing back as if to confirm we were still following. I don't remember seeing anyone else take this trail, Rebecca observed. Not a single other hiker. That's what we wanted, isn't it? Some peace and quiet? She nodded hesitantly. Yes, but it feels different somehow. Not peaceful exactly. More like expectant. I finished for her, surprising myself with the choice of word. The terrain changed gradually, becoming less hospitable. Moss-covered stones appeared with increasing frequency, some slick with moisture despite the absence of recent rainfall. The air felt thicker, carrying an earthy scent tinged with something less definable, a mustiness that clung to the back of the throat. "Do you hear the creak?" I asked, stopping to listen. According to the ranger's directions, we should have been approaching the waterway that fed the falls. Rebecca shook her head. "Nothing, but I feel like we're being watched." Under normal circumstances, I might have laughed at such a comment or dismissed it as imagination. Instead, I found myself scanning the surrounding trees with increased vigilance. The forest had grown too quiet, the silence no longer peaceful, but oppressive. "That's just the isolation talking," I said, attempting to sound reassuring despite my own growing unease. "When you're used to the city, genuine solitude feels strange." Bella stopped abruptly, her attention fixed on a dense thicket to our right. Her posture stiffened, ears forward, the ridge of fur along her spine rising slightly. "What is it, girl?" I asked, moving closer to examine whatever had caught her attention. The underbrush revealed nothing obvious. No movement, no unusual shapes, just more of the endless forest stretching into shadow. Yet Bella remained fixated, a low whine building in her throat. "Probably just a squirrel," I suggested, tugging gently on her leash. "Come on, let's keep moving." She reluctantly followed, but her demeanor had changed. The playful exploration was gone, replaced by hypervigilance. Every few steps she would pause, her head swiveling to track something I couldn't perceive. Rebecca noticed the change as well, moving closer to me as we continued along the increasingly obscure trail. "I don't like this," she whispered. "Something feels wrong." I was about to suggest turning back when we emerged into a small clearing. The sudden absence of overhead canopy allowed sunlight to flood the space, a welcome relief from the oppressive shadows. A fallen tree provided convenient seating, and we gratefully took the opportunity to rest. "Let's have some water and a snack," I suggested, shrugging off my backpack. "Then we can decide whether to continue or head back." Rebecca nodded, retrieving our water bottles while I opened a package of trail mix. Bella refused to settle, pacing the perimeter of the clearing with her nose to the ground, occasionally freezing to stare intently into the surrounding forest. "Have you noticed there are no animal sounds?" Rebecca asked between sips of water. "No birds, no insects, nothing." Now that she mentioned it, the absence was striking. Forests typically buzz with life. The distant call of birds, the rustle of small mammals in underbrush, the constant symphony of insects. Here, there was only the sound of our own breathing and the occasional snap of a twig beneath Bella's paws. "Maybe there's a predator nearby," I suggested. "Bears or mountain lions can silence an area." The thought brought little comfort. If a dangerous predator was indeed lurking nearby, our isolated position suddenly seemed far more vulnerable than adventurous. As we prepared to continue, I noticed something peculiar about the fallen tree we'd been sitting on. Unlike other deadfall in the area, this trunk bore unusual markings, a series of deep gouges running vertically along its length. They resembled claw marks, but were spaced too widely and cut too deeply to belong to any wildlife I was familiar with. "Take a look at this," I said, running my fingers along one of the grooves. "Ever seen anything like it?" Before I could press for details, a new sound emerged from the gathering darkness, a low, rhythmic thudding like heavy footfalls on packed earth, approaching from behind us. Bella's resolve broke entirely. She lunged forward with such force that the leash slipped from my grasp and she bolted into the underbrush ahead. "Bella," I shouted, lunging ineffectually after her. "Look!" Rebecca pointed to where our dog had disappeared. Through the vegetation, barely visible in the fading light, was a narrow opening in the hillside. a natural crevice between two boulders that widened at the bottom to form what appeared to be a passage. "She went in there," Rebecca said, already moving forward. "We need to find her." The footfalls behind us grew louder, accompanied now by a faint sound that raised the hair on my neck. A wet, clicking noise like mandibles or teeth repeatedly opening and closing. With little choice remaining, I followed Rebecca toward the rocky opening, hoping it would provide temporary shelter while we composed ourselves. The space between the boulders was tight but passable, requiring us to turn sideways and shuffle carefully to avoid scraping against the rough stone. Beyond the entrance, the passage widened into what I initially took to be a shallow cave, but quickly realized was something far more disturbing. A tunnel excavated into the hillside, its walls too smooth and ceiling too regularly arched to be natural. "This isn't right," I whispered, instinctively reaching for Rebecca's hand. "This shouldn't be here." Ahead of us, Bella's whimpering echoed from the darkness, drawing us reluctantly forward into the unknown depths of what was clearly not a natural formation, but something deliberately constructed in the heart of the wilderness. The tunnel extended approximately 30 feet into the hillside before opening into a chamber roughly the size of a small classroom. My flashlight revealed walls composed of tightly packed soil, reinforced with a lattice of roots and what appeared to be animal bones. The floor was unnervingly level, packed hard by what must have been years of use. "What is this place?" Rebecca's voice wavered as she swept her own light across the disturbing scene. The beam illuminated the far wall where crude symbols had been carved into the packed earth. Angular designs and spiraling patterns that bore no resemblance to any language or pictograms I recognized. They seemed to pulse slightly in the moving light, creating an illusion of subtle movement that made my vision swim if I focused too long. Bella huddled in a corner, her entire body shaking. When I approached, she pressed herself harder against the wall rather than coming to my side as she normally would. Her eyes, reflecting the flashlight beam, showed an animal terror that transcended ordinary fear. "Something's been living here," Rebecca whispered, pointing to a depression in the center of the chamber. The indentation resembled a nest of sorts, lined with materials that turned my stomach. Fragments of clothing in various states of decay, clumps of what appeared to be human hair, and animal remains in advanced stages of decomposition. The smell, which had been masked by the earthy scent of the tunnel, now hit me fully. A putrid mixture of rot and something musky and animal. "We need to leave," I said, backing toward the entrance. "Now." A sound from the tunnel froze us in place. The scrape of something heavy moving through the narrow passage, blocking our only exit. Bella's whimpering intensified, and she attempted to dig into the earthen wall as if seeking an alternate escape route. In desperate silence, we extinguished our flashlights and pressed ourselves against the chamber wall, hoping whatever approached might miss us in the darkness. My hand found Rebecca's, our fingers interlocking in a grip so tight it bordered on painful. The scraping continued, punctuated by the wet clicking sound we'd heard in the forest. It grew louder, then stopped abruptly at the chamber entrance. In the absolute darkness, I could see nothing, but other senses compensated with terrifying clarity. I could hear labored breathing, not the panting of an animal, but something deliberate and controlled. I could smell a new odor beneath the chamber's existing stench, a sharp, acrid scent like ammonia, mixed with something metallic. Rebecca's nails dug into my palm as something entered the chamber. Though I couldn't see it, I felt its presence as a pressure change in the air, a displacement that suggested considerable size. It moved with deliberate slowness, circling the central depression. The clicking sound started again, now accompanied by a low vibration that I felt through the soles of my boots. My lungs burned with the effort of silent breathing. Every instinct screamed to run, but rational thought insisted that movement meant certain death. Beside me, Rebecca trembled uncontrollably, and I feared her fear might betray our position. The presence completed its circuit of the nest and paused. Though I could see nothing in the blackness, I knew with absolute certainty that it had turned in our direction. The breathing changed, becoming deeper and more rapid. The clicking accelerated to a continuous rattling that reminded me horribly of excitement or anticipation. It took a step toward us, a heavy, shuffling movement that revealed it was bipedal. Another step followed, then another, each bringing it closer to our position against the wall. The ammonia smell intensified until it burned my nostrils and throat. In that moment of overwhelming terror, my survival instinct finally overrode paralysis. With my free hand, I reached into my pocket and retrieved the emergency flare I always carried on hikes. In a single motion, I struck the cap against the ignition strip and threw it toward the center of the room. The flare erupted in brilliant red light that flooded the chamber, temporarily blinding me after the intense darkness. As my vision adjusted, I caught only glimpses of what stood merely feet away. A hunched figure significantly taller than myself, covered in what appeared to be ragged clothing or some form of matted fur. Its face remained mercifully in shadow, but I saw enough to know it was neither human nor any recognized animal. The creature recoiled from the sudden light, emitting a shrill, keening sound that pierced through my skull like a physical pain. It stumbled backward, arms raised to shield itself from the flare's harsh illumination. "Run!" I shouted, pulling Rebecca toward the tunnel entrance. The creature lunged for us but misjudged in its light-blinded state, crashing into the wall where we had stood moments before. We scrambled into the narrow passage, the sounds of pursuit close behind as we navigated the confined space. Bella had bolted ahead of us, her survival instinct overcoming her earlier paralysis. I could hear her panicked breathing as she led our desperate escape back toward the forest and what we could only hope was safety. We burst from the tunnel into deepening twilight, our lungs burning with exertion and fear. The forest around us had transformed in our absence. The already dim light now reduced to a murky haze that rendered the surrounding trees as little more than looming silhouettes. Bella raced ahead, no longer needing the leash to keep her on course as she instinctively sought the direction of safety. Behind us, the keening sound from the tunnel changed to something more guttural. A series of barking coughs that echoed through the trees and seemed to come from multiple directions simultaneously. Whatever pursued us was either communicating with others of its kind or possessed the ability to project its voice in a way that created the illusion of numbers. "Don't look back," I gasped to Rebecca as we stumbled through underbrush. "Branches whipping at our faces and exposed skin. Just keep moving." The terrain sloped downward, which I took as a positive sign. The falls and main trail lay at a lower elevation than the isolated path we'd followed earlier. Our headlong flight precluded any attempt at navigation beyond this basic understanding. We simply followed Bella, trusting her instinct and superior senses to guide us toward human presence. A crash sounded to our right, much closer than expected. Something large was moving parallel to our course, occasionally visible as a dark shape darting between trees. Another crash echoed from our left, confirming my worst fear: we were being flanked. "They're trying to cut us off," Rebecca realized, her voice breaking with exhaustion and terror. The forest opened slightly ahead, revealing a shallow creek bed that cut through the hillside. Without hesitation, Bella plunged into the knee-deep water and began splashing downstream. I followed her reasoning immediately. Water would mask our scent and potentially slow our pursuers. "This way," I urged, pulling Rebecca into the frigid current. We waded as quickly as possible, fighting against slippery rocks and the water's resistance. The creek bent sharply around a hillside, and as we rounded the curve, I heard Rebecca gasp. Ahead, the waterway dropped away into a series of steep cascades that eventually rejoined the main falls far below. "We can't go down that," she protested, tugging against my grip. "And we can't go back," I countered. gesturing at the forest behind us, where movement was now clearly visible, dark shapes converging on our position from multiple directions. Desperate, I scanned our surroundings for alternatives. On the opposite bank, partially concealed by overhanging vegetation, was what appeared to be a game trail cutting diagonally across the hillside. There, I pointed. If we can reach that path, it might lead back to the main trail. We pushed through deepening water toward the far bank, the current growing stronger as we approached the point where the creek began its descent. Bella had already scrambled up the muddy embankment and stood waiting, her hackles raised as she stared back at the forest we'd fled. The clicking sounds intensified, now accompanied by splashing as our pursuers entered the water upstream. I boosted Rebecca onto the bank, then pulled myself up with muscles burning from prolonged exertion. The path was barely visible, a slight depression in the undergrowth that wound between trees and around boulder outcroppings. We moved as quickly as the difficult terrain allowed, constantly scanning ahead for signs of the main trail while fighting the impulse to look back at what followed. Bella suddenly accelerated, her behavior shifting from fear to purpose as she detected something ahead. "I think she's found the trail," I said, allowing hope to enter my voice for the first time in what felt like hours. The game path widened slightly, showing signs of more frequent use. Through gaps in the trees below, I caught glimpses of what might have been the main waterfall, though distance and failing light made certainty impossible. A familiar sound reached us. Voices. Human voices, carried faintly on the evening air. Rebecca nearly sobbed with relief, increasing her pace despite obvious exhaustion. We were close now, perhaps only a few hundred yards from the populated trail where rangers and other hikers would provide safety in numbers. The forest behind us erupted with activity, branches breaking, undergrowth being trampled, and the now familiar keening rising to a frenzied pitch. Our pursuers had abandoned stealth for speed, making a final, desperate attempt to intercept us before we reached safety. "We're not going to make it," Rebecca gasped, stumbling on a protruding root. I caught her before she fell, practically dragging her forward as Bella circled back to us, barking urgently. "We have to," I insisted, "just a little further." The path bent around a massive cedar, and suddenly we were there. The main trail stretched before us, wide and well-maintained compared to the wilderness we'd traversed. In the distance, perhaps a quarter-mile downhill, flashlights bobbed as late hikers made their way back toward the parking area. "Help!" I shouted, my voice cracking with strain. "Can anyone hear us? We need help." The distant figures paused, lights swinging in our direction. A voice called back, though the words were indistinguishable at this range. It didn't matter, they had heard us, seen us. We were no longer alone. Behind us, at the edge of where the game trail met the main path, the forest went suddenly, completely silent. The pursuit, so frenzied moments before, ceased as if a switch had been flipped. I risked a glance back and saw nothing but darkening trees, the boundary between maintained trail and wilderness now seeming like a physical barrier our pursuers would not cross. Bella's posture relaxed slightly, though she continued to stare vigilantly at the forest edge as figures with flashlights made their way up the trail toward us. I sank to my knees, pulling Rebecca down beside me, both of us gasping for breath as the first wave of relief washed over us. "We made it," she whispered, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face. We actually made it out. But even as rescue approached in the form of concerned hikers and a uniformed park ranger, I couldn't shake the sensation that we weren't truly safe, that we had merely been granted a temporary reprieve. The forest loomed behind us, its secrets intact, its inhabitants merely retreating rather than defeated. Whatever dwelled in those depths had allowed us to escape, and somehow that thought was more terrifying than the pursuit itself. The ranger's name was Watkins, a weathered man in his 50s with a perpetual furrow between his brows that deepened as we recounted our experience. He listened without interruption as we described becoming lost on the upper trail and the strange tunnel we'd discovered. I deliberately omitted details about what we'd seen inside, mentioning only that we'd been chased by something we couldn't clearly identify. Probably a black bear, he suggested, making notes in a small waterproof book. They're common in this area, though usually not aggressive unless you stumble near cubs. I exchanged glances with Rebecca, neither of us willing to challenge this comfortable explanation in front of the small crowd of hikers that had gathered around us. Bella, usually friendly with strangers, remained unusually subdued, pressing against my legs and flinching at every sound from the surrounding forest. "You folks are lucky," Watkins continued, closing his notebook. "We get at least 3 or 4 search and rescue operations every season for hikers who stray from marked trails. Not all of them end this well." His radio crackled with a request for his location, and he stepped away to respond, leaving us with the group of hikers who had been first to reach us. They offered water and energy bars, which we accepted gratefully. Their normalcy, their casual conversation and good-natured jokes about our bedraggled appearance felt surreal after what we'd experienced. "The trails up there aren't well maintained anymore," an older man commented, gesturing toward the higher elevations. "Park Service closed most of them after the incidents in the 90s. My attention snapped to him. "What incidents?" He seemed surprised by my intensity. "You didn't know. A series of disappearances back in 97 and 98. Hikers vanishing from the upper trails, never found. They officially blamed it on a rogue cougar, but..." He shrugged. "A lot of locals never bought that explanation." "Why not?" Rebecca asked, her voice barely audible. "Cougars don't take personal belongings," the man replied simply. "And they certainly don't stack their victims' gear in neat piles, arranged in circles in the middle of clearings." My skin prickled as I recalled the strange markings we'd seen on trees around the clearing where we'd rested. Before I could ask further questions, Ranger Watkins returned, ending the conversation with his official presence. "I've called ahead to the station," he informed us. "There'll be a medical technician waiting to check you over. Standard procedure for lost hikers." "We weren't exactly lost," I began, but Rebecca squeezed my arm in warning. "Thank you," she said to Watkins. "We appreciate it." The descent to the trailhead seemed to take hours, though my watch indicated barely 40 minutes had passed. Darkness had fallen completely, and the forest pressed close on either side of the illuminated path. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every shift of branches overhead made me tense, expecting to see those dark shapes moving parallel to our course. Bella remained hypervigilant, occasionally stopping to stare intently into particularly dense sections of forest before reluctantly continuing forward. Her behavior did not go unnoticed by Ranger Watkins. "Your dog seems pretty spooked," he observed. "They usually sense things before we do." "She's been through a lot today," I deflected, urging Bella forward with gentle pressure on her leash. As promised, a medical technician waited at the ranger station, a young woman who efficiently checked our vital signs and examined the various cuts and scrapes we'd accumulated during our flight through the forest. Satisfied that we required no immediate medical attention, she recommended rest and plenty of fluids. Throughout this process, I noticed Ranger Watkins engaged in low conversation with another uniformed officer who had arrived while we were being examined. They occasionally glanced in our direction, their expressions unreadable in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the station. Eventually, Watkins approached us with a clipboard containing standard forms documenting our experience. As I completed the paperwork, he cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I need to ask, this tunnel you mentioned, could you describe its location more specifically?" Something in his tone made me hesitate. "It was off the upper trail near a small clearing with unusually marked trees." "Why?" He exchanged glances with his colleague before responding. "We need to investigate any potentially unsafe features in the park. Natural tunnels or caves can collapse, posing dangers to hikers." "It wasn't natural," Rebecca stated flatly, her earlier caution apparently abandoned. Someone or something made it. Watkins' expression remained carefully neutral. Old mining operations existed throughout these hills before the area became a state park. What you found was likely an abandoned prospect tunnel. It had symbols carved into the walls, I added, studying his reaction. And there were remains inside. The second ranger stepped forward. Animal remains are common in sheltered areas. Predators often drag kills to protected locations to feed. Their coordinated response felt rehearsed, as if they'd had this conversation before with other hikers who'd stumbled upon similar discoveries. Before I could press further, Watkins closed the conversation decisively. We appreciate your report and are glad you made it back safely. The upper trails will be temporarily closed for maintenance while we investigate. As we prepared to leave, the older hiker who had mentioned the disappearances approached us in the parking lot. He glanced toward the ranger station before speaking in a lowered voice. They won't find anything, you know. They never do. What do you mean? I asked. Whatever you saw up there, whatever chased you, it knows how to hide its traces. Been happening for generations. He handed me a worn business card with a local phone number. If you want to know more, there's a group of us who've had similar experiences. We meet monthly. Before I could respond, he walked away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the lot's perimeter lighting. I pocketed the card without examining it further, suddenly eager to put as much distance as possible between ourselves and Cascade Falls. The drive home passed in near complete silence, both of us lost in our thoughts. Bella eventually succumbed to exhaustion in the back seat, though her sleep was fitful, punctuated by whimpers and twitching legs as she relived the day's trauma in canine dreams. As headlights illuminated the familiar streets of our neighborhood, Rebecca finally spoke. We can't tell anyone else about this, she said quietly. Not the details anyway. I nodded, understanding her reasoning without explanation. The rational world had no framework for what we'd experienced. To share it would invite disbelief at best, concern for our mental health at worst. Yet as we pulled into our driveway, I couldn't escape the sensation that our return to normalcy was an illusion, that we had brought something back with us from those shadowed hills. Not a physical presence, but an awareness of something that existed beyond the boundaries of ordinary human experience. That awareness felt like a burden, knowledge that could never be unlearned or comfortably integrated into daily life. And worse, a growing certainty that what we had encountered was not finished with us, that our escape had been merely the opening chapter of a longer, darker narrative yet to unfold. 3 weeks passed with surprising normalcy. We returned to work, engaged in routine social activities, and gradually the physical evidence of our ordeal faded. The scratches healed, the bruises yellowed and disappeared. Only Bella's behavior remained persistently altered. She refused to enter certain rooms alone, particularly our basement office where the lighting was similar to the forest's dimness. She barked at shadows that slid across our bedroom wall at night and wedged herself between us in bed, something she had never done before. I found myself unable to discard the business card the older hiker had given me. It sat on my nightstand, a tangible reminder that we were not alone in our experience. The number remained uncalled, yet I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, as if doing so would somehow invalidate what had happened to us. Rebecca rarely spoke about that day, though I occasionally caught her staring into the distance, her expression haunted by memories she couldn't share with friends or colleagues. Our relationship became simultaneously closer and more isolated, bound by shared trauma, yet separated from others by the impossibility of articulating our experience. Sleep became problematic for both of us. I found myself waking at odd hours, convinced I'd heard the distinctive clicking sound from the forest. Rebecca experienced recurring nightmares that left her gasping and disoriented, though she refused to describe their content beyond saying, "It's still chasing us." On the surface, we functioned. Beneath, we were unraveling. The breaking point came unexpectedly. While sorting through hiking gear we hadn't touched since that day, I discovered something lodged in the treads of my boots, a small, oddly shaped object that initially resembled a stone or twig. Closer examination revealed it to be neither. The object, approximately the size of a guitar pick, appeared to be carved from bone. One surface bore markings similar to those we'd seen in the underground chamber. I showed it to Rebecca that evening, placing it carefully on our kitchen table. She stared at it with growing horror, then abruptly pushed back her chair. "Burn it," she said, her voice shaking. "Or bury it. I don't care which, but get it out of our house. It might be evidence of..." "Evidence of what?" she interrupted. "What exactly do you think this proves? That we weren't imagining things? We know what happened to us, but no one else will ever believe it." "The group that man mentioned might," I suggested. "Other people have seen what we saw, experienced what we experienced." Rebecca's expression hardened. "And what good has it done them? Are they any less traumatized? Has anyone taken their account seriously?" I had no answer for that. She continued more softly, "I need to move forward. We need to move forward, not dwell on this or seek validation from strangers." That night, I stood in our backyard with the bone fragment and a metal trash can. I struck a match, watching the small flame flicker in the evening breeze before dropping it onto the kindling I'd arranged. As the fire caught and grew, I held the fragment over the flames, expecting to feel some sense of closure or relief when it was gone. Instead, I hesitated. Something about destroying this tangible connection to our experience felt wrong, not morally, but pragmatically. As if in erasing the evidence we would somehow become more vulnerable rather than less. In that moment of indecision, Bella began barking frantically from inside the house. Not her usual alert bark at passing delivery trucks or neighborhood cats, but the same terrified sound she'd made in the forest. Through the kitchen window I could see her pressed against the glass, her entire body rigid with alarm as she stared not at me, but at something beyond me in the darkness at the edge of our property. I turned slowly, the bone fragment still clutched in my hand. The yard appeared empty. The boundary where maintained lawn met the beginning of woods revealed nothing unusual in the dim illumination from our porch light. Yet as I stared, I became aware of a subtle wrongness. A section of shadow that seemed deeper than it should be, more defined in its edges against the surrounding darkness. As I watched, the shadow shifted slightly. Not moving location, but somehow adjusting its dimensions, becoming more solid and less easily dismissed as imagination. The familiar clicking sound emerged from that concentrated darkness, faint but unmistakable. I backed toward the house, the fire forgotten, the bone fragment now slick with sweat in my clenched fist. When my shoulder blades touched the back door, I fumbled blindly for the handle, unwilling to take my eyes from the darkness that now seemed to be gradually expanding toward me. Inside, Rebecca stood frozen in the kitchen, her face pale as she watched Bella's frantic reaction to whatever lurked outside. When I burst through the door, slamming and locking it behind me, she didn't ask questions. She simply moved to close all the curtains and blinds while I checked that every entrance to our home was secured. We spent that night huddled in our bedroom with Bella between us, listening to subtle sounds of movement around the perimeter of our house. Soft, scraping against siding, gentle pressure testing windows and doors. By morning, the sounds had ceased, and daylight revealed no evidence of any visitor. No footprints in the soft earth of our garden beds, no scratches on doors or window frames. Only the trash can in the backyard showed any sign of disturbance. Tipped over, its contents scattered, the fire long extinguished. The bone fragment was gone. That afternoon, I finally called the number on the business card. A woman's voice answered on the third ring, neither greeting me nor identifying herself. I hesitated, suddenly uncertain what to say. "I found your group's contact information at Cascade Falls," I began awkwardly. "My wife and I had an experience there a few weeks ago." "What trail?" the woman asked without preamble. "The upper trail, beyond the main falls. We found a tunnel. A long silence followed before she responded. First meeting is just you. No spouse, no friends, no recording devices. We'll text you the location after we verify you're alone. Verify how? I asked, but the line had already gone dead. I told Rebecca about the call that evening. She listened without interruption, then asked simply, "Are you going?" "I think I have to," I replied. "Whatever this is, it didn't end when we left the forest. It followed us home. We need to understand what we're dealing with." She nodded slowly. "Just be careful. Remember that trauma can make people believe all kinds of explanations that might not be true." The meeting was scheduled for the following evening at a location I would receive only an hour before the appointed time. As instructed, I went alone, driving to an unremarkable coffee shop in a neighboring town where only 3 other people waited. The older hiker from the park, a middle-aged woman with a prominent scar across her left cheek, and a younger man whose hands trembled slightly as he clutched his coffee cup. Our conversation lasted nearly 3 hours. They shared their own encounters, each story containing elements that resonated with our experience: the unnatural silence, the strange markings, the sensation of being herded rather than directly pursued. The woman, Carol, had actually seen one of the creatures clearly during daylight hours while conducting botanical research in the area 5 years earlier. Her description matched the glimpse I'd caught in the tunnel: unnaturally tall, covered in what she described as fibrous material that wasn't quite fur or clothing, and possessing abnormally long limbs with too many joints. "They've been there as long as there have been historical records of the area," the older man, who introduced himself as Howard, explained. "Native tribes avoided those hills entirely. Early settlers reported encounters but were largely disbelieved." "What are they?" I asked, though I wasn't certain I wanted an answer. "We don't know exactly," Carol replied, "but they're intelligent, territorial, and apparently capable of limited communication with each other. They could easily eliminate anyone who ventures into their territory, but they don't always choose to. It's more like they're studying us. Testing boundaries," the younger man, Peter, added, "learning our capabilities and limitations." "Why hasn't anyone documented this?" I pressed. "In an age of smartphones and constant documentation, how is this not widely known?" Howard smiled grimly. "Think about it. Would you have believed any of this 3 months ago? Would you have accepted an account like yours from a stranger? Or would you have dismissed it as delusion, hallucination, or hoax?" He had a point. Even now, part of me searched for rational explanations, despite having experienced the encounter firsthand. The human mind resists information that fundamentally challenges its understanding of reality. "There's something else you should know," Carol said, her voice dropping lower. "Once you've encountered them, once they've become aware of you individually, they don't lose interest. They'll find you eventually wherever you go." "What do you mean?" I asked, though the bone fragment's disappearance had already suggested the answer. "They mark their subjects," Peter explained. "Sometimes physically, sometimes through means we don't understand, but they can track those they've interacted with across surprising distances." "How do you know this?" Carol pulled back her sleeve, revealing a series of parallel scars identical to the markings we'd seen on trees in the forest. "Because we've all tried to run," she said simply, "and they've all found us no matter where we've hidden." I left the meeting with more questions than answers, and a growing sense that our encounter at Cascade Falls had not been random chance, but the beginning of something we didn't yet understand. The group had offered no solutions, only commiseration and the cold comfort that we were not alone in our experience. Driving home through darkened streets, I found myself checking the rearview mirror with increasing frequency, unable to shake the sensation of being followed. The rational part of my mind attributed this to heightened anxiety after the meeting's disturbing revelations. The newly awakened part that had experienced the impossible refused to dismiss the feeling so easily. As I pulled into our driveway, the headlights swept across our front yard, briefly illuminating the edge where manicured lawn met the beginning of woodland. In that momentary flash of light, I caught a glimpse of something that shouldn't have been there. A tall, angular figure standing motionless among the trees. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving me questioning whether I'd actually seen anything at all. Inside, Rebecca waited with Bella at her side. One look at my expression told her everything she needed to know about the meeting. "They're still watching us, aren't they?" she asked quietly. I nodded, unable to soften this reality with comforting lies. The group believes they mark certain people for ongoing observation. That once they've identified someone of interest, they don't simply let them go. What do we do? It was the question I'd been dreading because I had no satisfactory answer. The group's members had been living with this reality for years, adapting to occasional encounters and unexplained phenomena without finding any permanent resolution. "We stay vigilant," I said finally. "We document everything, compare notes with others who've had similar experiences, and we don't hike in unfamiliar forests anymore." Rebecca attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "So we just live with this, except that there are things in the world beyond normal understanding, and some of them have taken an interest in us." "For now," I agreed, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. That night, as we prepared for bed, Bella's head suddenly lifted from her paws, ears pricked forward in alert attention. She rose slowly, moving to the bedroom window that overlooked our backyard. A low growl built in her throat as she stared into the darkness beyond the glass. Rebecca and I exchanged glances, neither of us willing to look and confirm what we already knew, that something waited in the shadows, watching and assessing. Something patient and methodical that operated according to its own incomprehensible agenda. Something that had followed us from the wilderness into the supposed safety of civilization, blurring the boundaries we had always trusted to separate humanity from the unknown. We turned off the lights and lay in darkness, listening to Bella's continued growls and the almost imperceptible sounds of movement outside our home. Neither of us spoke the truth we both understood. This was not the end of our story, but merely a pause between chapters in an ongoing narrative we had never asked to join but could not escape. In the morning, we would again pretend normalcy. We would go to work, interact with colleagues, maintain the comforting fiction that the world operates according to known rules and predictable patterns. But in quiet moments, when shadows deepened and the veil between ordinary reality and something else grew thin, we would remember what lurked beyond that boundary and know with terrible certainty that it remembered us as well.